Once upon a time, not too long ago, the future was a wonderful place. Science fiction was an adventure. The universe was our oyster. There was nothing that technology couldn't conquer. We'll pilot our flying cars, we'll never get sick, the robots will do all the work for us, and we'll walk barefoot on the moons of Jupiter. Of course, there was always a lurking darkness, but the human race was mostly awesome, an optimistic bunch. Most fiction and pop culture was a reflection of the Eurocentric status quo. The late 19th and early 20th century was a time of prosperity, huge scientific advancement, and replacing the old crumbling monarchies with democracy. The logical prediction was for this to continue and accelerate. Next stop, utopia. But the world changed. We had a couple of world wars, fascism and totalitarianism reared their ugly heads. Even the relative safety of the capitalist democracies didn't feel quite so safe anymore. Now science fiction had something else to extrapolate. What if this scenario plays out? You can keep your flying car. I just don't want to be shot in the head for thinking the wrong thing. Let me just tidy up the definition. Dystopia means bad, a bad place. Well, technically it means the opposite of utopia, a utopian place gone bad. In the context of speculative fiction, it leans more into fear. It describes a society, people that are frightened. But I want to focus on what most people envisage when they think about dystopian fiction. Tyrannical governments controlling the population via surveillance, propaganda, and violence. Eroding our liberty, a handful of the ruling class with a boot on the neck of the masses. For the good of the people. Dystopian Fiction 101. I don't think there is a perfect place to start. The vast majority of this subgenre is thought-provoking and very well written. It's one of the few peninsulas of science fiction that the real literature snobs allow into their canon. The quintessential novel, the big brother of all the dystopians, is of course George Orwell's 1984. It demonstrates that typical oppressive authority. There are cameras in every home, information is beyond propaganda, history is revised at will, and all competing pleasures will be destroyed. Deeper and darker than even that, the party, those that already have all of the power, want even more. They want us to willingly embrace the system. If the torture doesn't work, the brainwashing will. As profound and important as 1984 was, it wasn't the first to tackle the modern world in this manner. Many point to Jack London's The Iron Heel from 1908 as the pioneering dystopian novel. But I think the earliest and the best example that displays that aesthetic that we're talking about is Yevgeny Zamyatin's We from 1921. It's not a subtle book. Our main character, D503, lives in a city made of glass under the constant watch of the Bureau of Guardians. Everybody works for the one state, which applies logic and mathematics to determine your place within the system. It's supposed to be one giant harmonious machine. The really scary thing is D503 embraces all of this. He loves the one state and he conforms willingly, happily even. Ignorance is bliss, until somebody shows him what's hiding behind the curtain. Much like Orwell was writing about his personal experiences in the Spanish Civil War and flexing his opinion on socialism, Yevgeny Zamyatin was having a satirical pop at the USSR from behind the Iron Curtain. Life imitated art, and the book was banned in the Soviet Union until 1988. Which brings me on to the theme of censorship and another must-read dystopian classic. Fahrenheit 451, Ray Bradbury, of course, 1953. I think this book does something even more interesting with the concept of control and social redaction. Equal parts blunt with the burning of books and oblique, allegorically complicated if you read a little bit closer. In essence, it is a book about censorship, destroying literature and independent artistic expression. But Bradbury suggests that it wasn't instigated by the government. We, the people, fragmented into minority groups, censored each other. We destroyed the things we didn't agree with. We did it to ourselves, as if that would ever happen. It's also a commentary on how horrified Bradbury was at the dumbing down of content and the actual way in which we consume entertainment and information. He thought that one day we would be sleepwalking, zombified, distracted by gormless media while the real world passes us by. Charlie! But my favourite, and in my opinion, the most interesting of all the dystopian big hitters is Brave New World, Aldous Huxley, 1932. The common thread between those other books is the depiction of a flavour of wrongdoing. Usually a mostly unseen, small ruling class with an ideology controlling the masses. It's assumed that we will sympathise with the protagonist. They are the innocent manipulated, and those in power are degrees of evil, and they will never willingly relinquish control. Brave New World commits to that same big machine idea as We, and also proposes a similar ignorance is bliss environment, but it delves much deeper into what really makes a society stable and happy. It's very uncomfortable reading a case for a dystopia and against the natural order of humanity. It makes you ponder what's really important to mankind. Do we really want freedom at the expense of happiness, safety, and good health? Where is that balance between light and dark? If we willingly condition ourselves to be happy, are we truly content? Or do we need some pain and suffering to be human? But the key difference between Brave New World and the others is the intentions were good. A modern society tried to create heaven on earth, but we sleepwalked into something else. Fahrenheit 451, We, and 1984 have a tiny, tiny crumb of hope. Maybe one day the people will rise up and break the shackles of oppression. Brave New World is a dystopia through utopian tinted glasses. As we were frog-marched through the 20th century, the subgenre evolved. Dystopian fiction was less about what if the West became totalitarian, and more about what if our beloved democracy bit us in the arse. Dystopians weren't so easy to spot, or novels would take place in that setting, but they were more about the plot or the characters and not so much about the politics. I think we became quite cynical. Most science fiction took place in a future that took the dystopian setting for granted. Everything's fucked, but here's a story about some cool robots. Take Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? It's an examination of empathy, a very deep, very weird contemplation on what it means to be human. It's a story about a bounty hunter, but the world itself has very few redeeming qualities. In fact, most Philip K. Dick novels use a broken, scary, corrupt, oppressive world as the backdrop for something else. Almost all of his characters are miserable schmucks who get diddled by the system. Other subgenres started to overlap. I usually like to separate dystopian from post-apocalyptic fiction, but since the 1950s, the bomb, or World War III, was used as a catalyst. Climate change, overpopulation, pandemics, and economic blunders are used as excuses or legitimate reasons for a firm hand to come swooping in to save the day. And then they adopt the familiar brutality and control. Just like during the rise of real-world brutal regimes in the early 20th century, authors reflected what was going on around them and applied it to future fiction. And then cyberpunk happened, which isn't exclusively pessimistic or desperate, but it is dark and dirty, and as described by David Ketterer, low life and high tech. It's a far more nuanced approach to a dystopia, often a fully functioning society that's dominated by megacorporations, corruption, and a feeling of hopelessness. There's a sense of claustrophobia. There's too many people, too much neon, crime, and noise, layers of technology that doesn't always benefit us, lots of crazy drugs, and everybody is miserable. It's not a total disaster. It's not oblivion. It's just a shit future. Something strange, but not entirely unexpected, happened at the turn of the millennium. There was a boom in YA dystopian fiction. For the record, I don't think that YA, young adult, should be considered any less valid than adult or high literature. It's just as vital to that demographic, and it's packed full of amazing stuff. Traditionally, young people were reading more uplifting material. YA science fiction was all about adventure and wonder. When you got old and jaded, you started to read more depressing stuff. That's how it worked. The big dystopian books were assigned to kids in schools. But in my experience, if you force people to read, study, and analyse something, most will react negatively. Breakthrough books like The Giver, The Host, Gone, Uglies, The City of Ember were written for young people, often depicting younger characters and focusing on what would alarm someone with their whole life ahead of them instead of the usual middle-aged guy. A trickle turned into a flood in 2008 with the release of The Hunger Games. It changed YA. It changed science fiction. Teen dystopian fiction was the new sexy vampire or nerdy wizard. Now, I'm all for young people, old people, all people reading more. I think it collectively contributes to a better society. I really do. But is there something ever so slightly worrying about the popularity of YA dystopias? Why the sudden shift from other genres? I don't think there's a danger that it will warp someone's fragile little mind, but I do think that current trends, just like 100 years ago, reflect the real world. Have we caught up with that fear of the future? The constant coverage of climate change, dodgy elections, and big countries lying to their people is in our faces every day. Maybe we can protect our children by banning certain books or censoring all the bad stuff. Or we can get some really good writers to plant certain ideas in the popular books so that we could manipulate or help them with their opinions. Yeah, somebody has to keep an eye on the children. They are the future. We must protect the status quo for their own good. So where does that leave us? What drives our nightmare visions of the 2020s? Is it the threat of the end of the world as we know it? Will we boil the oceans, scar the land, and turn on each other in the dust? Will we give birth to a new breed of technology that enslaves us? Or worse still, distracts us from the real problem? Or will we drown in apathy, exhausted by the modern world, told what to do by the man, broken by trained personnel, fitted with collar and chain, given a pat on the back, ground down in the end, found dead on the phone, dragged down by the stone?